Welcome to The Road Less Traveled with Tiffany Rosenbaum. This podcast is about sharing the success and failure of entrepreneurs. Join in and learn from others' mistakes so you don't have to go through the same hardships in business. Now let's welcome your host, business coach, real estate investor, and proud wife and mom, Tiffany Rosenbaum.
All right, welcome to another episode of The Road Less Traveled. We are really excited. Ben is here with us, and from having a goal to summit all 58 mountains to selling a book of business in the property management industry to acquiring another book of business in the property management, Ben runs a full brokerage and property management firm operating in Denver, Jacksonville, and Tampa with nearly 450 residential units under management. I'm actually really excited for this episode, especially with the acquisition side, as it's been very much prominent in our industry lately. Everybody's like, I want to acquire. But before we go into that, Ben, you got to tell us about the 58 mountains you want to summit.
Well, Colorado has these big rocks out here called the Rocky Mountains, and we affectionately call them 14ers because they're mountain peaks that are over 14,000 feet in elevation. And Colorado has the more 14ers than any other state in the country. There's 58 of them. Wow. So there is a little quest that a lot of crazy people go on to try to climb to the top of every single one of them. I've got a long ways to go. I'm about 14 or 15 in, but I'm going to try to get another 10 of them knocked out this summer.
Oh my goodness! Now doing this is not easy. How many people? Do you even know the percentage of people that actually accomplish this?
It's pretty small. I mean, it's not quite as hardcore as having to get ropes out and climb and nothing like the freestyle movie, although there are routes you can take like that. The majority of them are just really aggressive hiking routes or some scrambling. So obviously you got to be in some level of physical shape to do it and used to the altitude. So I don't know the exact percentage of people, but every time I tell people I'm doing it, they think I'm crazy, so I'm assuming it's small.
Well, you got to have a little bit of crazy to go into property management as well. So let's gear over that a little bit. How did you get into property management, Ben?
It's kind of a family business for me. My parents got into real estate, or my dad did, when I was probably 7 years old. So growing up for me, I always say I was a real estate brat. Just all the dinner table conversations and driving around town was just about real estate. My stepmother was in it as well. So they always were talking about, this appraisal that didn't go through or this home inspection they had the next day. And they were pretty heavy in sales. And then along the way, they had heard about property management, and they thought this would be a great way to feed our sales business. We'll get all these rental properties, and landlords will buy more properties or they'll sell properties. So they kind of were dabbling in it. And then just over the years, they acquired books and kind of organically grew. And before they knew it, property management was a higher percentage of their revenue than sales commissions were. So they kind of turned into being more of a sales or a property management brokerage that does sales instead of a sales brokerage that does property management. And so I just kind of grew up around it. And then after I finished my military service and some Department of Defense work, I decided to kind of gravitate back to my roots and kind of join the family industry.
How long have you been in property management now then, since you've gone full time in property management?
It's been almost 20 years next year.
Okay. So you started 2006?
About 2007 is when I went full-time in it. Yeah.
Right before the market went crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Right before we had the housing bust. And I was doing it in Florida, which had, they were competing to see which states could have the most foreclosures. Florida was always number 1 or 2. And I was filing 5 to 6 evictions a month.
Well, it was big in Arizona as well. It was huge. Yeah. Evictions were insane. We got in the market about 2010. We saw the big eviction. So you didn't start your career in Florida. I thought it was in Denver. Or was it in Florida?
No, I started working for my family's company in Florida in 2007. And then in 2013, I broke away from them, moved out to Colorado, and started my own company. Okay,
so tell us about that. When you started ground zero, you started your own company. How was that in the property management industry?
It was exciting and nerve-wracking all at the same time. And that's probably the experience most entrepreneurs go through. But I had 2 little kids. One of them was 2, and one was just barely 4, and a wife that stayed home. And So we just kind of decided to pick up, everything we had and move across the country. We didn't nearly have enough money saved, but we had some money saved up. And I'd already been doing it for about 5 years at that point. So I kind of knew what the trend line would be about how quickly it would take us to, build a sufficient size book to hopefully feed us. And so we just worked really hard. I was prepared to go deliver pizzas at night if I had to, but luckily I never had to throw the little sign on top of my car and drive pizzas around. So we were able to turn the corner after about 11 months and brought on about 40 doors in the first year, and then another 60 doors the second year, and then just kind of kept growing from there. But that first year was a little difficult. The family knew they weren't going to see me too much through that year, and I kind of worked sun up, sundown, and wake up the next day and rinse and repeat. But it was exciting all at the same time. It was working from a little tiny room in the basement of our house, and I was in control of everything. There was no staff, and so I look back fondly on it, but I don't know if I'd want to repeat it again at this point.
I love that you brought that up, because I think sometimes people get into property management today and go, oh, the tech should take care of it. And yours and my story is probably very similar. It was like a grind. You have to be willing to put the work in to grow a business. So you had to work for 11 months, and it was to get on the other side of it where it wasn't as bad anymore. But during those 11 months, did you ever question, like, oh, did I do this the wrong way?
No, I never did. The 5 years I worked for my father's company, I learned a lot of what to do and a lot of what not to do. And, they had a big company. It's really hard to change direction of the ship once it's on a certain course. So, it was easier for me to start from scratch and say, I'm going to do it just like this and put everything in place that was best practices at the time. Now the industry has evolved leaps and bounds with software opportunities and AI. But back then, I feel like I put everything in place that was the best, for what we had at the time. And there's nothing, I never really doubted myself. I really felt pretty confident in it. The main concern I had was, am I going to make enough money before we run out, enough cash flow monthly before we run out of our small nest egg that we had. And I had a goal at the time to, not have my wife have to go to work. And so, looking back, I'm really proud of how we did it, and it definitely was a fun time. And, it's certainly not for everyone, but I'm always encouraging the people to start their own business if they feel like they have the stomach to push through it. It's definitely a great experience.
I like how you said if you have the stomach to push through. I don't regret it. I love it. I'm so glad we did it as well. Like you said, I don't think I'd want to go back to that time, because it was really hard, and we were on food storage. But it was also a time that I wouldn't give up, because it taught so much, right? Like going through that time, you build a bond with your family. You build a bond, like you went through a struggle. So you grew your business. First year, 40 doors. Second year, 60 doors, which is great growth. Holy cow. Mm-hmm. Now, but you decided to sell some doors. Tell us that thought process. Why? When? Because usually it's how far can I grow, sell the whole thing, but you sold only a portion of it. Why?
Yeah, so we had grown up to about 215, 220 doors, and I started bringing on staff at that point, and I was great at managing properties and building a website and doing all the processes. I was not great at hiring. And then also, everyone who starts a management company from scratch goes through that whole beggars can't be choosers phase where, all doors are created equal, just as many doors as we can get. I don't care if the owner wants to do their own repairs and they want to use 10 home warranty companies and they want to help me review the applications. Sure, whatever you want, And so we signed up a lot of properties in the beginning that probably weren't the best. A lot of them were great, but I was having a pretty rough couple months. Just had some employee problems. They were good people. They just weren't a good fit kind of with the company. And I was coming home and I was complaining to my wife, and I was like, I just want to sell this whole thing and be done with it. And she said, well, you haven't always felt that way about the company, like you used to enjoy it, right? And I said, yeah, back when it was just me down in the basement and I had control of everything and everything was being done proactively and the owners were happy and there was nothing but 5-star reviews, and so it was great. And she said, well, why don't you just go back to that? So I started, the wheels started turning in my mind, and I looked at all the properties that were kind of down near where we lived, which is a pretty, the county that we lived in is one of the higher income counties in the United States. And they're good quality properties. And then everything else north of like County Line Road, down south Denver, I added up how much those properties made. And those properties, if you added up the income, almost exactly equaled what my expenses were with the employees. So I had the little epiphany that I could get rid of all those properties and also let the employees go, and my income would stay the exact same. So, and it was compounded with, I had really young kids at home still. We'd had a third child, and I felt like I was just missing out on a really, important time of life that you're never going to get back. And so it gave me an opportunity to fix a couple things. I got to get rid of some properties that probably weren't a good fit for at least our system. I got to get rid of some employees that just weren't kind of fitting in well. And then I also got to go back to working from home and see my kids a lot more. So it was, so that was, the solution. Then it was like, well, can we do that? I've never had anyone or heard of anyone just buying part of a portfolio before. It's usually once you get to retirement and you want to be done with property management. So I was active in the NARPM chapter, so I knew a lot of company owners, and I just started reaching around to some of them. And I made it very clear up front that I was not leaving the business. I was not going to sign any kind of non-competes that said I couldn't do business in any parts of town. I was willing to just do a non-compete for those clients that we were selling them, but just made them aware of what I was trying to accomplish. And I figured, hey, worst thing they can do is say no, and I just keep the properties and keep moving forward. But I found someone to purchase them, and we did just that. Even worked out well. One of the employees transferred over to their firm and is still there today. And so it was a pretty seamless transition, or acquisition, I should say. The landlords loved it because they're already used to dealing with that staff person anyways, and they used Appfolio and we used Appfolio, and it was kind of a picture-perfect transition. And I got to drop down to about 100 doors and just go back to working from home for a period of time and lick my wounds and kind of get back to where I liked property management again.
You know what I love? You didn't just make a rash decision. You went back to the numbers. You're like, hey, I divided the properties up. This is how much they made. And you were able to make an educated decision on that. So often people don't know their numbers. And I think that's an incredible thing to say here, is how important was knowing your numbers in that decision to help you make that decision?
Oh, it was absolutely critical. I mean, once again, I'm the only income earner in our family at that time, and I had to make sure that I was still going to be able to support myself. I was concerned about the employees as well, although some of them we just had to completely let go. But I was trying to make sure I could make it to where the other employee could go and still have a job. But at the end of the day, the purpose of a business, first and foremost, the reason you start it is to take care of yourself and your family, and that was my main priority. So I've always been a numbers person. I had a systems engineering background before, so I was very accustomed to looking at numbers and spreadsheets, and I do all my own bookkeeping and QuickBooks, so I was very quickly able to run profit and loss statements and segregate things to determine, would this mathematically work? Because I always knew, worst case, I can bring on more properties if I need to, but there's that period of time where you're going to have to make sure everything's covered. And that was something that was pretty easy for me to do, and it only took me, I think that same night she asked me the question, I just went to work and I did the math real quick, and it was like, I'm like, Lord, I can get rid of all these properties and be sane again. And now we've grown way past that, but I was able to get back to a size that didn't make me want to completely run for the hills and kind of figure out what went wrong. Like a lot of things went right. We grew really aggressively, and that was great. But what went wrong that made me not enjoy the business? And so I was able to kind of do some soul searching over a couple of years before we got back into growth mode again.
You're able to dial that in, which is incredible, because some people just burn out, and you're like, hey, what do I love? What do I not love? Now, let's go into the acquisition side. Hindsight's always 20/20. There's usually something that could have been done differently. Is there anything you would have changed, knowing what you know now, if you were to go back and do that acquisition again, that sell?
Through the acquisition process itself, that went pretty smoothly. There's always a little better proactive communication you could do. However, I had the luxury of, I sold to Mark Cunningham, and Mark has done this so many times and I had done a couple when I worked for my parents, but he and I really teamed up to make it a pretty seamless acquisition. The only thing I would have done differently, looking back on it, it was the right decision at the time. Now that I can Monday morning quarterback it, I'm like, man, I know how big I am now. I'd have another 130 doors more if I hadn't sold them. And so I wonder if I could have reevaluated another solution besides just getting rid of the doors. Looked at maybe some different employee solutions or something else. But once again, I try not to go back and doubt myself too much. But through the acquisition itself, I can't really think of anything that I would say that was a hard lesson learned that I wish we hadn't done. I feel like everything went really smoothly. But it was a perfect situation. They were using Appfolio, we were using Appfolio. They were portfolio structured, we're portfolio structured. You don't always have the luxury of that with who you sell to.
No, that's like a perfect system.
It was perfect. I think Mark even said it's the best acquisition they had ever done, and they've done a lot of them as far as how smoothly it went. So it doesn't always go that way. A lot of it was just kind of coincidental luck on how we kind of were aligned. But in general, though, I feel it went really good. I don't think I'd change too much about it.
Okay, on that, because this side of the acquisition, a lot of people don't talk about. Like, it doesn't happen. Hey, I'm just going to sell you a book of business. I'm still going to keep this on. This is something that could really open the eyes of some people. Like, hey, I really just don't want this many anymore. I really want to get down to 100 or 200. So this is something that I actually think could open the eyes of a lot of viewers and listeners. Now, the question I have is, and I'm hoping you'll be able to tell me, I don't know if you'll be able to, but during the acquisition, was there a clawback period that if you lost owners that he did not have to pay you for?
There was a clawback period, and it was a really interesting structure that I'd never heard of, and it was Mark's idea. They'd came up with it for some other acquisitions they'd had. He said, I don't remember the exact, I believe it was something like, we'll give you 70 or 80% upfront of what we're agreeing to, and then the remainder of it we're going to pay in monthly installments. However, if we lose a property, we're going to subtract that out. So instead of saying we're going to manage it for 12 months and then reassess and pay one last lump sum, he said, hey, if say there's 20 properties that pull, but they don't pull all at the same time. One of them's with us for 6 months. Well, we're not going to make you give up 6 months of that final payment because we were able to receive 6 months of management commission from them. But then we lost the final 6 months from them. Then another landlord, they stayed for 8 months and then they pulled. So we're going to pay you monthly for 8 months on that property, and then we just won't pay you for that one anymore. So that was how they structured it. It was kind of a dynamic clawback provision.
That's a new one I've never heard of.
Yeah, it was really fair. I've never heard anyone doing that, but I thought that was great because he's like, hey, if they stay for the majority of the time, then you're going to get the majority of that remaining 20%. If not, we'll reassess and we're going to subtract it out. So that was kind of how he had put it in there, and I thought that worked really well. I've used that in other acquisitions that I made proposals for, and so I thought that was a really fair way to do it.
That is a fair way. I really like that. Now, so you sold a book of business, you dialed things back in, but when was the decision to go, you know what, I want to start ramping up again. I want to start getting bigger again, and I want to acquire again. How many years did pass, or was it just a year? Was it months? What happened?
Yeah, so it probably was about 2 years before we really started taking a lot of doors. And I would take them on if it was perfect. They were like right in my backyard. The landlord said all the right things. They weren't crazy. They were financially stable. All the green flags, I would sign them up. It was enough to kind of keep us from shrinking. But the entrepreneur in me it hurt every time I turn away business because I had this geographic box, and I said, if they're not in this box, I'm not taking them. I don't care if it's a $10,000 a month property or they've got 30 doors, I'm not taking them. And we were pretty strict about that for about 2 years. After 2 years, it was just gnawing on me how much business I was referring out. And luckily, I know a lot of NARPM buddies. I was able to help them and send the leads to good people, but I still hated that I wasn't pulling those leads on. So for about 2 years, I just was dialing in our systems, doing a lot of video training, recording. And once I thought I had a good foundation in place to start bringing on more staff, that's when we started bringing on more doors. And I didn't initially hire someone. I just started ramping up the portfolio that I was managing, and I brought on an assistant and had them help me for a little while. And it was probably about 3 or 4 years after that we really started hiring more property managers to start building additional portfolios under our umbrella.
Okay. And how many units are you in Denver right now?
Denver, we're at about 250.
Okay,
roughly.
but then what year did you acquire in Jacksonville? Correct?
Jacksonville, all of Florida's expansion was just last year in 2025. So I acquired that book in September. So it's only been 6 or 7 months into that acquisition. And then prior to that, we just started an office in Tampa, Florida. No acquisition. That was just a ground up. I hired a property manager, and we're feeding leads to him to build his own portfolio there. But then this opportunity to acquire about 205 doors popped up in Jacksonville, and that's one of my hometowns, so I decided to snatch it up.
You're like, it's time. So let's go through that acquisition, because you sold, but then you also have gone through an acquisition. And did selling a book of business help you with this acquisition to understand how you wanted to structure it?
It absolutely did. I mean, a lot of the contract that I used when I sold mine, I kind of replicated it. So that was certainly helpful. The clawback provision is one of the areas I put in there. Just kind of, the liability stuff, I've seen acquisition contracts that were just looked like they were written on the back of a napkin, and and I didn't want to pay an attorney. I did consult with an attorney, and they wanted to charge me like $30,000 to oversee the deal, and I thought that was a little bit much. So
that is a little bit much.
Yeah, so I was like, I'm going to go back to this contract that worked really well. It wasn't the exact same situation though, because this other company was in fact closing down, and we did want to acquire like their web address so we could point it to us, and we assumed their lease agreement on their office space, so we had to add some things, and it also was a seller carry loan, so there were some differences that we had to tweak the contract, but I mainly just started with the contract that I already had in place and just went from there. Kind of like what we do when we start a management company. We like borrow a management agreement from this person and borrow one from that person, then kind of tweak it and make it our own.
So can you tell us a little bit of what the big wins were with this acquisition? But then we want to go into what were some things that could have been done different to make it better?
Yeah, the big wins, I've had multiple clients all say that, man, we're so impressed. This went off completely perfect. We were a little worried, but you guys haven't missed a beat. We brought a lot of extra technology and just processes and best practices that other company was not using. So I think the landlords were really wowed by that. I did a lot of I recorded some videos of me introducing myself and our company to them as well. So I think that helped a lot. The main thing that went wrong through the process, we could have done the due diligence a little bit better. There were some bookkeeping issues once we kind of we had done our due diligence up front, but kind of at the 11th hour, we found that there were some shortfalls in their escrow, and we were able to get it fixed. And the owner of that company put the money in to fix those shortages. But that was the main thing. I really should have spent more time really. And I've heard that before. If you focus on nothing else, make sure the money is there. And that is, it's a tedious process because you got to go lease by lease by lease and ledger by ledger and go through it. But in the end, it all worked out great. But I certainly would have put a little bit more attention into that. Otherwise, most of the landlords, like I said, were very happy. There were some that weren't happy, and they were already unhappy before we came into the picture. So then any change, of course, is bad in their mind, and they were mad at us for that. So we had a few of them pull the properties. But by and large, I'd say so far, 95% of the landlords are still with us.
Which is a really good number in acquisition.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll find people, I was hearing a number the other day. I was talking to someone, they were like 10 to 20% easy churn, if not more, during an acquisition. I was like, that's high. But
I'm expecting 10 or so by the time we're done. We're only 6 months in, but as of right now, it's looking pretty good.
That's awesome. So what, and I agree with you, what you just said is making sure the money's there. There's so many times that people are like, hey, I just want to get the deal done. But if you're going to look at one thing, make sure the money's there. Because if it's not, guess who's fitting the bill? It's you, because you got to make sure the residents are taken care of and the owners are taken care of. And if you acquire, it's liability. So what would you tell anybody that's going through an acquisition or thinking about going through an acquisition? Because I consider that the new gold star in property management. I'm going to go acquire. What advice would you give them?
I think you have to go into it with proper expectations. And, something's going to go wrong through the process. And it depends what the acquisition is. Is it just a book? Are there employees coming over? We did put a lot of time into making sure we vet the staffers that we're going to move over, really make sure they understand our culture as well. It's not just us acquiring them, they have to interview us as well. And so definitely that would be something I would really push people and make sure that you have the expectations set, because not only do you not want to lose owners and property, you don't want to lose staff people as well and have that problem. Because that was a critical piece for us, was trying to keep the continuity for the owners. Is, hey, the name's changing on the door, but it's the same building, it's the same phone number, and hey, same people that you've been dealing with for the most part. We had a couple changes, but so really making sure that piece of it stays pretty solid, I think is important. And there might be some changes in staff down the road when you do acquisitions, but for the first year, you want to minimize the change, and that's the biggest advice I have. You don't go changing management agreements. Don't change what the late fee policies are or the renewal fees or anything. Just leave everything alone. The owners are already waiting for everything to collapse as soon as they hear about this. So don't give them a reason to think it's going to collapse. Just keep everything status quo and let them breathe a little. And then you can start, tweaking some things here and there to try to move things the direction that you want.
Oh, I love that. 100%. And one other question, how do you analyze a deal, an acquisition?
So, yeah, and there's a lot of ways to do it. I've heard the most, I'd say we did a little bit of a hybrid. The majority of it was just based on annual management commission. And we did the actuals. So we just dumped 12 months of all the revenue sources into a spreadsheet. The main one we focused on, though, was what the management commission was, not the ancillary fees. So we looked at, all right, this portfolio that you have has generated X amount in the last 12 months, and then we devised a multiple off of that. I won't disclose the exact amount because it's kind of a private deal, but in general, you see anywhere from 1% to 2%, depending on how healthy that portfolio is. But then we were also acquiring their office space and their desks and computers and things of that nature. So there was some additional consideration for that. But the majority of the time, I think you're going to see a multiple off the management revenue if you're buying a book. We weren't buying their whole business. I didn't need their name or their reputation or all that. I just primarily needed the book of business. That was 90% of the value of it, but they did get some additional value for just the kind of the personal property that they had in the office as well.
Which is something you can do. It's 100%. We did that on multiple of our acquisitions. We wanted everything just to stay. Just let it be. I don't want to have to go put in another more desks, and so 100% that can be part of the contract. What was something you would tell people to watch out for?
What, through an acquisition?
Mm-hmm. Or selling,
I think
any side of the acquisition.
Yeah. I think the main thing is, like I said, just be looking out for trying to keep it as, the continuity in place as much as you can through that process, and just look at the numbers. That's the most important part, is the money side of it. So, as I said before, if you look at nothing else, make sure the money is there, and then just try to keep everything the same, and just have expectations that are proper expectations on your side on what you're going to make on the short run versus the long run. Like, I wasn't expecting to make a lot of money for the first year or two on that acquisition. We've got the loan costs, but as well as just we're leaving everything the same. The portfolio is not generating the revenue per doors that it should, but we'll change that over time. So, but you do need to be able to pay the bill. So that's the number one thing especially if you're bringing staff on, is this portfolio going to generate at least enough from day one to cover the expenses? Because I'm a big believer in you should profit at all times. You shouldn't say, oh, we're going to operate at a loss for 12 months and then maybe turn the corner.
Especially not in property management. You churn someone, then you're really hurting.
Yeah, we're not VC backed and we're not Fortune 500. We can't afford to be operating at losses. We're not looking at government. We can't print money. So, making sure that at least is covering the expenses that you're going to acquire. I mean, with every door you bring into your software, you're going to have a per door cost for a lot of these, and you have to add more phone lines. And so really looking at what those additional expenses are going to be. And then depending on kind of how you finance the deal, you're going to have your principal and interest payments as well. So that was the main thing I was looking at, is I want to acquire this, but I don't want it to hurt me every month to where I resent doing the acquisition in the first place. So really focusing on your business numbers as well as the escrow numbers is probably the answer to that question.
I love that. And then Do you have any recommendations on books that the viewers or listeners can listen to or read to? Because I know you're big into this, to help them with their business, to help them with their acquisition if they decide to, or to grow organically. What could help them?
Yeah, one of my favorite books is called Making Money is Killing Your Business. And it's a phenomenal book that helps you realize that just because you're making a lot of money doesn't really mean you're operating a successful business, because businesses are supposed to bring you money and time. And if you can't step away to go climb a mountain or travel to Europe without the business collapsing, you don't really have a successful business. So that's probably my number one book recommendation. Of course, the E-Myth is a great one on just how to build systems in place, whether you're a one-person operator or you have 30 people on staff. That's always a favorite. And then How to Win Friends and Influence People is a classic that everyone should have to read.
Those are really good books. You like to just picked out some top ones. Well, Ben, we really appreciate you coming on today and speaking to our listeners, especially about the major topic of acquisitions that is in our industry right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in today to The Road Less Traveled. If you're organizing an event, workshop, or simply planning something exciting and would like to have Tiffany Rosenbaum join you or want to have her on your podcast, visit TiffanyMRosenbaum.com and click on Book Tiffany to get started.